Hello and welcome. So today's video is all about the Ball of the Burning Men. So Charles VI of France has gone down in history as the Mad King of France, but he is also known as the French king who almost burnt to death. Charles was born on the 3rd of December 1368 and his parents were King Charles V of France and Joanna of Bourbon. Charles came to the throne in 1380 when he was 11 years old, and in 1385 he married Isabeau of Bavaria. On the 22nd of January 1393, one of Isabeau's ladies-in-waiting, Catherine, got married for the third time. So Isabeau decided to hold a masquerade to celebrate the marriage. So Catherine was actually a widow, and apparently on the third marriage of a widow, it was traditionally an occasion for mockery and fun, with all sorts of licence, disguises, disorders and loud blaring of discordant music and clanging of cymbals. So Charles VI turned up at this masquerade with 5 of his friends dressed as wood savages. Their costumes were made of linen that had been soaked in resin to which flax had been attached so as to give the appearance that the men were all hairy and shaggy, but this also made them a massive fire risk. So Charles and his friends also wore masks that were made the same way, and this is so that people would not know who they were and then they'd have to guess who they were. Now Isabeau did know that her husband was one of the men dressed up as the wood savages, but she didn't know which one he was. But the rest of the partygoers actually had no idea that the king was involved in this performance. So while the king and his friends were giving their performance, because they were such a huge fire hazard, strict instructions had gone out which forbade the lighting of hall torches, and no one was allowed to enter the hall with a lit torch. So the king and his friends got on with their masquerade performance. They howled like wolves, they spat obscenities, and they danced in a frenzied manner while inviting people to try and guess who they were. But Charles's brother Louis, Duke of Orleans, did not get the message about no torches. He turned up at the masquerade with his friend Philippe very late and very drunk, and they entered the hall carrying torches. So some accounts say that Louis held up his torch close to one of the men so he could see who they were, and a spark from this torch came off and fell on the man and set him on fire. And because all the men were actually chained together during this performance and were close together, the fire spread between all of them. But another contemporary account says that Louis actually threw a lit torch at one of the men. So all of these dancers, because of the costumes they were wearing, were suddenly engulfed in flames. Now Isabeau obviously knew that her husband was one of these dancers, but she didn't know which one he was, so she fainted in shock. But luckily Charles was actually standing away from the rest of the dancers. He was actually standing next to his aunt Joan, Duchess of Berry. Now when Joan saw that all the other men were catching on fire, she actually threw her skirts over her nephew to protect him from the flames. So the mask at this point just descended into chaos. The dancers were crying out in pain as they burned, and the audience were crying out in pain as they tried to help the men and got burned themselves. The monk of St. Denis described the scene. He wrote, 4 men were burned alive, their flaming genitals dropped to the floor, releasing a stream of blood. Now, of the 6 dancers that took part in the Wood Savages dance, only 2 of them survived. King Charles, because of the quick thinking of his aunt, and the Sieur de Nantucket, who jumped in a vat of wine. One of the men, the Count of Drony, died at the scene. 2 of the men died 2 days later of their burns, and another man died 3 days later of his injuries. So the citizens of Paris blamed Charles's advisors for the incident. And a great commotion swept through Paris, with the people threatening to depose the king's uncles and kill depraved courtiers. So to try and stop this happening, the court done penance at Notre Dame Cathedral, and then they went on a royal progress through the city with the king on horseback and his uncles walking next to him in humility. So Louis, who was blamed for the incident because of course it was all his fault, donated money for a chapel to be built at the Celestine monastery, but his reputation never recovered. So that was a little story about the Ball of the Burning Men. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.